Alf's life and work. No better way to do this than to hear from Alf himself. We're delighted he agreed to this project and to give the first lecture. The respect and affection felt for him is demonstrated here this evening by the presence of all Battersea's living MPs. Alf himself, John Bowies, Martin Linton, Jane Ellison and our current MP, Marcia de Cordova. Other former MPs with us this evening. Other former MPs with us tonight, Claire Short, John Bercow and Fiona McTaggart. As I am sure you all know, he came here, Alf that is, as one of Sir Nicholas Winton's kinder on the kinder transport. He was, in other words, a refugee, and the experience has been and continues to be central to his work. Never has this commitment to refugees been more important. We must change the poisonous rhetoric surrounding refugees and asylum seekers. And this is personal for me too. My brother here tonight and I are the children of a refugee mother and her parents who arrived here as refugees from Nazi Germany in early 1939. We publicised this event as the inaugural Alf Dubs lecture. That implies more than one lecture. Fiona kindly made this one here possible. We are looking for sponsors of future lectures. In order to discuss this unique opportunity, please form an orderly queue in the bar later. And now, to get this show on the road, I'm delighted to introduce our chair, Baroness Valerie Amos. Her stellar career includes formerly Leader of the House of Lords, Secretary of State for International Development, and she is a Lady Companion of the Order of the Garter, and she's currently Master of University College, Oxford. So, over to you, Val. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to friends, colleagues who are here to honour you tonight and to listen to your lecture. And it's a particularly important time, as Anne said, as we are going through and living through some really serious challenges. Recent UN High Commission for Refugee figures show the following: that there are over 100 million, in fact 108 million people across the world who are forcibly displaced. 35.5 million of them are refugees. Most refugees, as we know, settle, if you can call it settle, in neighbouring countries. They move as a result of conflict, persecution, insecurity, and because of natural disasters. And people from 3 countries, Ukraine, Syria, and Afghanistan, dominate the list. But let's also remember people from the DRC, from Myanmar, from Ethiopia. And as more conflicts and crises emerge, we often forget those that are ongoing. It's too much to take in. But Alf, you don't ever let us forget. You've been a strong voice and tireless campaigner for the rights of refugees. Principled, unflinching, persistent. As an MP, as director of the Refugee Council, which is when I think you and I first worked together, as a minister and as a backbench peer. We remember, for example, the important amendment to the 2016 Immigration Act, which you sponsored, known as the Dubs Amendment, which offered some unaccompanied refugee children stranded in camps in Europe safe passage to Britain. Everyone here tonight admires you and admires your work. And I know that you really don't want us to say that you're special, but you really, really are. And I'm going to be very formal for this final sentence. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the extraordinary Lord Dubs.
I'm a bit speechless, but thank you for the invitation. I've got to be a bit careful about one or two things, like the Dubs Amendment. You know, I never called it the Dubs Amendment. It was the media that did that. I wouldn't be so arrogant as to name it after myself. But let me deal with a few thoughts first. First of all, it was in the main hall here that, much to my surprise, in 1979 I was elected. And much to my dismay, in 87, I lost. I will talk a bit about refugees and human rights, but in a serious vein, I just want to mention, the tragic situation in the Middle East, because it's on all our thoughts. And both the 7th of October tragedy and the Hamas attack on Gaza. I beg your pardon, and the Hamas attack on Israel, and then subsequently the Israeli attack on Gaza with a large loss of life. We're not debating that here tonight, but I just want to put down that I do think we need a ceasefire. I just don't think we can go on like this. And I think the ceasefire should be timeless. It should include a return of the hostages, and it should include security guarantees both for Palestinians and for Israelis. We want to start doing something like that. We just can't sit there and watch these terrible news programs coming time after time. Anyway, just to go back a little bit, just a few Labour memories. When I was first MP for Battersea South, because it was all Labour MPs, and we had Borough Council, and we had and that was pretty interesting. However, today we have 3 Labour MPs, we have a Wandsworth Council, and we have a mayor in London. So it's come quite a long way since the other lot got in. Just a little anecdote or two. Shortly after being elected, in those days the Commons used to sit incredibly late hours. Utterly foolish, but there we are, because we thought socialism and insomnia all went together. anyway, so I was a meeting in Battersea, and I went back to take part in an all-night debate. And I got to the members' entrance in Commons. It was about midnight. It's an odd time to be going to work, but there you are. And then with the policewoman at the door said, "Good evening, sir." And with all the pomposity of a newly elected MP, I said, "I'm hoping to speak tonight." And she said, "Yes, sir, will it make any difference?" And I've kept that, and it was something I'm conscious about. And of course, I did make my speech at about 4 in the morning, and I then driving away, and I realised on the radio it said the Commons have been sitting all night, and my chest puffed up, and I thought, what a stupid thing to be puffing my chest up for. I mean, what a ridiculous thing to be doing. 6 in the morning, driving home, having made a speech that nobody cares about. Anyway, it's just the way it was. So, just a little anecdote about the NHS. I'm old enough to have been ill in hospital the day the National Health Service started in the 1940s. And in those days, there were some real formalities. And I happened to be in the hospital the day the health service began. Okay? And I was only a teenager, the rest were all adults. Stockport, near Manchester, Stockport Infirmary. And the consultant came round. In those days, consultants and matrons, it was quite formal, and you didn't really speak to them unless they spoke to you first. However, he passed me, and I said, "I have a question to ask." And he said, "Yeah, what is it?" And I said, "Are we having a party to celebrate?" he said, "What for?" I said, "Well, the hospital's ours. It's all ours." Anyway. So off he went, and the other people said, "Alf, what's going on?" So I had to explain, we had to battle for this. Anyway, let me just say, I also had a spell in hospital last year, okay? And I warn you, don't ever ask a person of my age how they are, because they might spend a long time telling you.
Yes.
Somebody in the Lord's Eye said, "Hello, how are you?" And since you asked me, he said, and 20 minutes, anyway, however, I had this spell in hospital, and I was in intensive care. This is not a sob story because I'm fine. Intensive care, and about 3 in the morning, if you know what intensive care is like, it's like sort of Houston in the rush hour noises and things. Anyway, 3 in the morning, and a doctor came up to me, and it turned out to be a German consultant, and she said, "We know who you are." I hope I said, "Please don't tell anybody." Anyway, so and then of course, you get these hospital pajamas and nightgowns and things. Anyway, and the press studs didn't work; kept falling open, and I said, "This must be a job lot from Baroness Moan." Anyway, so I can't really milk being in hospital for anything else, because the rest of it is just a bit dull for all of you. But those of you that did come to see me, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your visit. Okay, more to the present time. As you heard, I came on a kinder transport, and Nicky Winton was the person who organised it, and some of you have seen the film One Life. And I just have to say, I can't be objective about the film, because the tears sort of ran down my face the first time I saw it, and the second time I saw it, the tears still kept running down my face. I thought I'd be hardened to it. Anyway, he was an amazing person, and I can't judge it as I would judge any other film, but it was quite an experience to go there. And there were 10,000 children that came on kinder transport, and sometimes we have campaigned and argued that if we could take 10,000 in 38, 39, we could also do it today, but I'll come on to that in a minute. This is my memories, very brief memories. We had to, in my school book, I had a picture of President Benesch, and we had to tear that out and put in a picture of Hitler when the Nazis occupied Prague in March 1939. And there is a plaque in the House of Commons, a thank you plaque from the kinder transport children to the people of Britain for having given us safety and sanctuary. In the 1970 election, I had to go to the cities of London and Westminster before I came to Battersea. And it was interesting, because there was a central constituency in Britain, and the Tory candidate, and eventually the successful MP, was Christopher Tugendhat. So we had a refugee from Vienna competing with a refugee from Prague. And the media never picked it up. So maybe it didn't seem that so... Anyway, they didn't pick it up. So, and then the other thing was, I was then, I did get the Commons, I was put on the Public Bill Committee dealing with British nationality, and I did think this is a really interesting situation, that a refugee from Prague who's a naturalised Brit can sit on a committee determining the future of British citizenship. And I thought that was quite a tremendous opportunity. And then the first time I was on the list for Prime Minister's questions, and that was quite a nerve-wracking experience anyway, but I stood up and I thought to myself, Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, and I thought to myself, here am I, a refugee, what am I doing here, asking the British Prime Minister a question? So much I nearly forgot what my supplementary was. However, it's the sort of these little occasions which, well, I do remember. And then, later on, I lost my seat, I became head of the Refugee Council, and then I was in Northern Ireland for 3 years, which were pretty interesting, and they were very positive. I think anybody who had to serve in Northern Ireland, Mo Molan was my boss, anybody who had to serve in Northern Ireland when there was no prospect of peace, it must have been a very depressing experience. But to have a sense that we were getting somewhere was very positive and very encouraging. Bad things happened, good things happened, and I could talk for the whole hour about Northern Ireland, but all I would say is that the people of Northern Ireland were lovely, and they sometimes said to me, "What do you think of us here in Northern Ireland?" So I said, well, if you're always nice to each other as you are to me, problem solved. And I meant that. Anyway, let me turn now to the position on asylum seekers and refugees. There's been so much happening; it's very difficult to get more than a few of the key points out. But I do think we have to be careful as to how we welcome refugees, and I want to say more about that. But I think as a country we have to come to terms with how we deal with refugees. We have to be a bit more careful about what language we use, and sometimes I get some abuse thrown at me as well. And I have to say that although I get some abuse, and things like pity you survived the Holocaust and stuff like that, but what women in public life get is 1,000 times worse than anything I get. It really is. It's shameful that racism and misogyny go together in such a nasty combination. And ask women in public life just how it is. So in a way, it's fairly minor. Anyway, so going back to 2016. I was talking to Yvette Cooper, and I decided to put down an amendment for child refugees, which then was called the Dubs Amendment. Anyway, I put it down, and I hadn't talked much about my background because I'd neither denied nor talked about it, but the media took it up, and it made it a little bit more awkward for the government, because if they criticise unaccompanied child refugees too much, it sounds like a personal attack on me. So, as I didn't initiate talking about myself, I just let that go. Anyway, Theresa May was Home Secretary. I'd first met her at a birthday party of Nicky Winton's, who was the constituent, and I was in Maidenhead, and it was his 100th birthday, and obviously MPs do go along when there's a 100th birthday. I mean, who wouldn't miss the opportunity? Anyway, it was there, and Nicky Winton was a great guy. He on his about 102nd or 103rd birthday, I asked him, Nicky, how are you? Oh, he said, I'm fine from the neck upwards. And he was intellectually so sharp, until he was 106, absolutely incredibly sharp, it was a joy to talk to him. By the way, he had been a Labour candidate for Maidenhead District Council twice, and he hadn't won because it was a fairly conservative area even then, so she knew that he wasn't of her political persuasion. However, he was a brilliant man, and I'll tell you one thing he did that distinguished him. He saw something that needed doing or looking at. And other people say, yes, that's important, and walk away. And he decided he wouldn't. He would stay there, he would actually act on it, and he did. And I think that was pretty terrific. Anyway, so I put down the amendment, and people got a bit excited about it, and Theresa May summoned me in. And this is something not too well known. She said to me, if these children come, it was for children, if these children come, then others will follow, and we don't want that. So I said, well, look, we can't turn our backs on children who are sleeping up in Calais or elsewhere. We can't do that. And then I had an offer made to me. I had to be careful. It wasn't couched as an offer, and I didn't talk much about it. And it was this. I was told that if I withdrew my amendment, then the government had a very limited scheme for Syrians called the Vulnerable Persons Scheme. And she told me, actually, I quite like her. It wasn't a hostile discussion. It was just a disagreement. But she said to me, if you withdraw your amendment, then I will increase the Voluntary Persons Scheme for Syria by 3,000, and there'll be mainly children. How about that? And I said, well, you could do that anyway, couldn't you? So what happened? I said, no, I can't withdraw my amendment. And I then kept quiet about this 3,000 because I was afraid that the Home Office might have made a mistake. They didn't withdraw it, and it stayed in the system. And I don't know whether it was the Home Office deciding to be generous or whether it was a mistake or what it was. And I kept quiet about it because a gain is a gain, and you don't have to boast about a gain, it's just a gain. So it always stayed in the system. Now, so the amendment passed in the Lords. It was slightly defeated in the Commons. My friend said, go in the public gallery and give them the eye, the MPs. And I don't know how you give them, I gave them the eye, and it was slightly defeated, and it was then rejected. Now, here's the test. I didn't know what financial privilege was. Any offers? I had no idea what financial privilege was till this thing happened. Boy, come on, some of you. Anyway, well, what it meant was, it's extraordinary. If a Lord's amendment involves expenditure, and it's very difficult to see any amendment in the Lords not involving expenditure, then the Commons can reject it on the grounds of financial privilege, because the Lords aren't allowed to do that. Now, normally the government just waive that and just goes on as before, but they use the financial privilege argument. And the wonderful Speaker of the Commons criticised them. Where's the wonderful Speaker of the Commons? criticised the government for having done that, because it wasn't quite anyway. So we had to take the numbers out and bring forward another amendment. It passed the Lords again, and then something very interesting happened. Public opinion suddenly woke up to this. Public opinion, and how do I know that? Well, I know several things. One is, somebody shouted at me in the street. Now, usually when they shout in the street, it's abuse, isn't it, of politicians? Oh no, keep going with your amendment. And I had government ministers come up to me and say, keep going with your amendment. And I said to them, why? You're not supposed to say that. I said, keep going with your amendment. So I took some encouragement from that. I'm not saying government ministers always go around supporting Labour amendments, but in this... Anyway, I didn't try and make it a Labour amendment. I said, we want your support as well, of course. Anyway, so I think one of the things that influenced public opinion was a picture of the little Syrian boy, Alan Kurdi, drowned on the Mediterranean beach, you may remember. And I think public opinion really woke up to this. They put pressure on MPs. So Theresa May summoned me in again and said she proposed to accept the amendment, and that's what happened. The numbers were then cut back. They originally had been 3,000. Because of financial privilege, we'd had to take the number out of the second of the amendment. Anyway, and so it was cut back to 480. And Safe Passage, my friends at Safe Passage, did a survey of local authorities, and we found 1,500 families who were willing to foster refugee children, even though the government said they couldn't find any more. Now, another thing happened in the meantime. There were some judicial review cases, and my friends in Safe Passage and elsewhere said, just appear in the High Court. I said, what for? Well, just appear in the High Court, it'd be helpful. So I walked in to one of these judicial review hearings in the High Court, and I saw a Home Office official who gave me the least enthusiastic smile I've ever seen. Anyway, but anyway, and then the judge said he was very pleased that I didn't just talk in Parliament, but I actually came and listened in the court. So I'm going to fast forward to a family reunion, because in addition to my amendment, which was for children that didn't have family here, more significant in some ways was the Dublin III amendment, which was about children who did have family here. So under the old EU rules, a child in one EU country could claim to join family in another. Syrian boy in France could join a mother or uncle in one of them. And I put in an amendment to the 2019 Act, to the 2017 Act, so that when we left the EU, we'd still negotiate to continue this process. And then came the 2019 Act, and the government took it out. And I must say, I'm fairly mild, but I was absolutely incandescent with anger. You know, they'd agreed in 2017. So then, to mollify me, they said, we'll have a meeting and discuss it. So I said, thanks. So at the meeting were 3 government ministers and 7 officials, including one from the Cabinet Office. So that was odds of 10 to 1, which I thought wasn't bad, given I had the arguments. Anyway, so, and then came this awkward moment. The immigration minister, he said, no, the children will be able to come anyway. I said, they won't. He said, yes, they will, there'll be some way. And then he looked at me in the eye and said, don't you trust me? And I lied. To my shame, I lied. I said, I trust you personally, but I don't trust the government. And it was a cop-out. I should have said, I don't trust you at all. I said, anyway, so I'm being honest. And I said, anyway, you may be moved. Within 6 weeks, he was moved to another job. So 8 of the children died. In the meantime, while this was going on, I had visited Calais a few times. The first time, there was still a jungle there, a camp, and in the shopping street, it's pretty awful, but it got worse. In the shopping street, there were some displays of tear gas canisters and rubber bullets. And I said, what are they for? And I was told that when the French authorities at that time had cleared half the camp, they had to use tear gas and rubber bullets. And I said, why? And they said, because the National Front were very active in that part of France, and they were trying to show how tough they were. This is the previous French government. And I said, but you don't defeat fascism by using fascist methods. I was quite shocked by this. And I was shocked by the way the far right in Europe generally has been exploiting the refugee issue for political ends. And unfortunately, they've had some success. Whether Germany, Hungary was always like that, Slovakia's gone like that, Germany, Angela Merkel took a hit, and there are other countries, Italy, France, and so on. So I think it's very depressing that the far right have been exploiting it in this way. I should say I also went to some refugee camps in Greece, including on the island of Lesbos. Very depressing experiences. And more recently I was in Calais a few weeks ago, and it was much worse. There was very little food for the refugees. There was so much water everywhere. They were virtually in swamped fields. They had very little by way of tents and things. Enormous British paid for fences and things to stop people getting anywhere. But it was a very depressing experience indeed. And the NGOs who were working there, a few of them, said it was very difficult. It was very tough. And the conditions physically were so poor. We got together, we each put in 20, 30 quid so we could buy some shoes for some of them, because they were just walking around in virtually no shoes in the mud. So that was an utterly depressing experience. On the positive side, over the years I've noticed there have been some brilliant volunteers working in the refugee camps. Volunteers mainly from this country, but also from other countries, who have been absolutely outstanding in going through very unfortunate experiences, very difficult experiences, and yet being willing to help their fellow human beings. I found the faith groups very supportive. I think the first time I went to Calais, I went with 5 rabbis. I'm a humanist, so it's all a bit complicated for them. But anyway, I'm not sure. Look, the faith groups would be very good, and above all, schools have been brilliant. Talk to refugees, talk about refugees to schools, and they really do get it. It's all I could do sometimes to stop them saying, I want to leave school and become a volunteer in Calais, because it is a very positive thing. And I think that volunteers have had very little praise generally. They do a fantastic job, and they're just not given any praise, they're not given any accolades. I think they should be. The schools are good, and of course NGOs like Safe Passage done a fantastic job indeed. Now, it is a sad comment that we've had some Home Secretaries, not Theresa May, who've called refugees invaders and who've used other abusive language. And the fact is, it is much more difficult for local communities to be supportive if the leadership of the country at the top says these people shouldn't be here because they're invaders are the enemy, surely, but in any language. And to call people invaders who are fleeing for safety is surely a misuse of the word in a most appalling way. And of course, the consequences are there because they upset public opinion. When public opinion is supportive, it's hard to say, look, come on, this is a good thing the refugees are coming. When the Home Secretary uses language like that, I just deeply regret language of that being used. I also have to say, this during the referendum, that I'm afraid atmospheres in local communities got a bit more hostile because of the referendum. I'm sorry that Boris Johnson said 70 to 80 million Turks were poised to enter Britain, which they weren't, and it wasn't true, but they were. So we then had the most recent Illegal Migration and Asylum Act. And that was a pretty appalling bit of legislation, and we've got the Rwanda legislation coming along. And I think you'll have followed the arguments about Rwanda, but clearly there are serious doubts about Rwanda being a safe country. I think in the last year we took 6 refugees from Rwanda, and if we give people refugee status from Rwanda, then how can we say it's a safe country? I don't understand. In any case, if the Supreme Court says it's not a safe country, I don't see how we can say, well, an Act of Parliament makes it safe, which is what the government have said. And the danger with all this is that we are backing off some of our international obligations. We were pretty well founders of the European Convention on Human Rights. We've supported the Geneva Convention on Refugees right from the beginning. And yet, if we step away totally or partially from our international agreements, then what sort of a signal does that send? I went with the committee to the Strasbourg court, and in the Strasbourg court they were appalled because they said, look, Britain's a founder member of the European Convention on Human Rights, and if you in Britain don't accept the decisions of the European Court, then the notorious abusers of human rights will say, well, if the Brits don't do it, why should we? So it'll have a knock-on effect, and it'll be a very, 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 very sad day. So I stand foursquare behind our commitment to the European Convention on Human Rights, and I stand foursquare behind the Geneva Convention. There are others as well. There's the rights of the child, and there's a Convention on Torture, and so on. So these are all very important instruments. And by the way, if we back off the European Convention on Human Rights, we're also undermining the Good Friday Agreement, which is written into the Good Friday Agreement. So I think that is quite wrong. Will this legislation get to Parliament next month? Well, not next Monday. We'll be doing the Lords will be doing the committee stage later and then the report stage. Well, I think it'd be pretty difficult. I think it'd be pretty difficult to get through, because I think the Lords should be elected. I don't want an appointed second chamber, but while we're there, we might as well do the best we can in it. And I think it's going to be difficult, because some of the lawyers on the crossbenches will say this is a fundamental constitutional point. This is not a matter of party political ding-dong. And a lot of Conservatives also don't like this particular type of legislation. Government keeps saying that refugees should claim asylum in the first safe country that they reach. Now, that is not the interpretation of the Geneva Convention by UNHCR. And what's more, think of it, when 1 million Syrians went to Germany in 2015, 2016, if they had to stop in the first safe country they reached, they'd have all been in Italy and Greece. So I don't think this first safe country argument is either clear, is either sensible in practice, nor is it right in principle. But the government keep using that. And of course, they're now criminalising asylum seekers. Anybody who comes across on a boat is regarded as committing a criminal offence. And we'll see whether they will bring into effect some of the bits of the illegal migration bill, which haven't yet brought into effect, which would tangle them in Nazi even more. I can explain that in more detail if necessary. So, what they're saying is that if you come across the channel by boat, that's a criminal thing to do, even though the numbers are not very different from what they were when people used to come in the back of lorries. Now, I think coming on a boat is appalling, because it's so dangerous, and the traffickers, we should deal with the traffickers in a different way. But I don't think Rwanda is going to set an example which will stop people getting on boats. I think what we've got to do is to have safe and legal routes to come to this country, and I've got to say to the French, look, people who've got a link with this country in Calais, you've got family here or something, we'll take them immediately, and you can then be tougher on catching the traffickers. In any case, we're about in relation to our size, we're about 17th out of 18th in taking asylum seekers. And the government said they wanted to cut down inward migration. Last year, we had 600,000. Now, there's nothing unworthy or wrong about being an economic migrant, but it doesn't give you the human rights protection that the Geneva Convention gives you. And so we're 17 or 18 in taking asylum seekers, and they're a very small proportion, the 30 or 40,000, of the 600,000 that we took. So there's something topsy-turvy here, and there clearly has to be a difference between, as I say, there's nothing unworthy about being an economic migrant. There has to be a difference between being an asylum seeker with various human rights instruments to protect you, and being an economic migrant when the country you're coming to has to decide whether we need you or not. Actually, because we do need them, because there are labour shortages, but that's a different argument. Now, just to talk a minute or two about Ukraine. The public response was pretty good. Let's be honest about it. It was pretty good, partly because we saw more clearly on our television screens what was happening in Ukraine than we've seen in relation to other situations. And partly, let's be blunt about it, the Ukrainians are white. And let's not mince our words. There's a generous response by the British public. Anyway, we're talking about a Ukrainian girl called Valia. Valia. And there was a brief period when children could could come here and get a visa to come here from Ukraine. And she applied. And then she was told she couldn't come. Valia's mother, father was fighting. Her mother was looking after other members of the family. And so this 16-year-old girl was by herself in Ukraine, in a war zone, so frightened that she stayed in a locked room all the time. And yet the Home Secretary, that was Priti Patel, the Home Secretary said there aren't enough safeguarding measures. The safeguarding was a family that had been vetted, both of them. The school had been vetted. The local authority was happy. This was near Birmingham. And everyone was happy. It was gold-plated safeguarding. And yet the then Home Secretary didn't like it. So there was an immigration minister who was very sympathetic. I met him twice, and I also in debates. And I said to him, look, what can I do? And he made it very clear it was being blocked by the Home Secretary. And I said, well, this is appalling. What can I do? He said, shout at me. So I'm not to be told by a government minister to shout at him. I did my best. I shouted. I may not have that loud voice, but it worked. And the last thing was I had lunch with her and her foster mum in the Lords, and she was doing her A-levels. Okay, well, okay, so it's good. Anyway. So, how we deal, let me talk a bit about, just a moment about how we deal with arrivals. I've talked about this before, but just before the pandemic, any of you football fans, Fulham, okay, I think, yeah, okay. Anyway, Fulham and Chelsea Football Foundations decided to have an evening of football training for refugee boys, spearheaded by Guy Lineker. So we got like that. I cut off my left hand. I'd done this when I was their age. And there were all these young boys. And look, it was only boys. And some people said I should have argued it should have been girls that had the football training as well. Well, all I can say is you can fight most battles, but I'm not sure you can fight them all at the same time. I copped out. Okay, I copped out. But anyway, it was a lovely evening, and it really was. It really was very inspiring, and these kids loved it. And what it made them feel is that they wanted to do all the things that were normal for children, boys of their age, which surely should be the aim, to normalise, I hate the word normalise, but to make it possible for it to be like any other kids. We were doing a survey of mental health, and one, I think this Syrian or Afghan boy said, please don't treat me like a mental health problem. I want to play football, I want to do all these other things, I don't want to be mental health. So it's very easy for us to say, because you're a refugee, you must have a mental health problem. It doesn't follow. You might have, or you might not have. Most of the refugees, what they want, the younger ones want to continue their education, which they've missed out on through their long journeys, and the adults want to work. And we don't allow them to work. So we've got people here who have to wait ages for their asylum application to be considered, and during that period they're not allowed to work, and it's a totally frustrating experience. And of course they're reliant on very little social security. It is a ludicrous, ridiculous situation that people should wait and be stuck like that. Right, I think my time's nearly up. So can I just say briefly, looking to the future, I think we need a Europe-wide policy on refugees. I think we need, although we're not in the EU, we can still cooperate with other countries. There should be a Europe-wide agreement, made more difficult by the far-right parties, but there should be a Europe-wide agreement that we share responsibility for refugees. There are going to be more movements with climate change and some of the wars and tension. There will be more movements, and we've got to be accustomed to that. And I think we can manage it, and we can manage it sensibly and in cooperation with other countries. Let's remember, if they're not on television, they're not known to be there at all. The Rohingyas, 1 million Rohingyas in southern Bangladesh who fled from Myanmar. Climate change will drive more people. The far right in Europe is going to become more difficult. And I fear that stop the votes might become an election issue. I hope it won't, because I think it'd be shabby if we use refugees as political football in an election. I'll finish on this. There was a Syrian boy in a refugee camp in Jordan, a large camp that housed about 70,000 people. It had water. It was better than most refugee camps. It had water, it had electricity, sanitation, all these things. And I said to him, well, what's happening to you? He said, well, I've had education in the camp, good. I've tried to get a job in the camp, I can't. I've tried to get a job outside the camp, I can't. Jordan has a large number of refugees and the job market is difficult there. He says, what is there for me? And I thought to myself, the one thing we can do here is to offer hope. Human beings can put up with very difficult situations where there is where there is some hope for them in the distance. Where there is no hope, there is only despair. And one of the things we can do is to give hope to refugees and welcome some of them at least to this country to lead normal, decent lives. Thank you.
Alf, thank you. Thank you so much for those vignettes and stories that really shone a light on the work that you've done, for demonstrating so very clearly the inhumanity of the asylum system, and particularly around the lack of government leadership, for really showing us that persistence pays off, and at the end for offering us some next steps and hope. So now it's the turn of all of you. We've got time for a few questions. So please, if you could raise your hand. I can't actually see those of you right at the back, so you will have to sort of yell or find a different way of getting my attention. But please do indicate, and then please say who you are and ask the question you'd like to ask. Don't be too shy. Oh, there's a gentleman here.
Thanks for those particularly encouraging words, Alf. And David Goldsworthy from Battersea Labour Party, taking up some of the reins that you've left us over the years. My question, I suppose, in a sense, is how do we stop that far right? I had a terrible experience last night of watching Peston on ITV, and they were interviewing Bannon, and I was completely terrified. And now we've seen on the positive side in Germany the massive demonstrations in the streets against the AfD. Do you have any other thoughts about how we might be able to push back and stop their growth?
Yeah. How we stop the far right, you're saying, really? Well, look, first of all, I do think, I'm repeating what I said earlier, I do think we have to be conscious that we have to win public opinion to our side, because public opinion is the best thing we've got. And whenever I say something, I try and do it aware that public opinion is, we've got to bring public opinion with us. When people know what some of the refugees who've come across the channel, what they've been through in their own countries. I mean, there was a Syrian boy who said to me once that he'd seen his father blown up in front of him by a bomb in Aleppo or Damascus. Now, how can anybody function in their lives when that's happened to them? And so some of the things the experiences they've had have been so appalling. So, and once we understand that, it's easier for us locally to be welcoming. We know what people have gone through and why it is that they need and entitled to safety and to pick up their lives. So part of it is education about that. Part of it is involving refugees, and they do want to help. A lot of them are very keen to support, to do things in their local communities. Is to actually get them involved and let people engage with them. You know, kids at school, engagement with refugees makes them much more acceptable. Because once people know them, it's much easier to have refugees here than if they're distant figures in the columns of the Daily Mail. So I think it's how we welcome them, and Wandsworth has a good reputation for that. It's how we welcome them. It is how we we must also stop using the sort of language that, hate speech about refugees, invaders, all this there's a whole lexicon of language which is just poisons the atmosphere and makes it harder for public opinion to be supported, and then makes it easier for the far right. Now, we have to do it in this country. I think they've got to do other things there. I'm told that there were massive demonstrations in Germany against that far-right meeting. I was told by some German politicians I met this week, every German town and city, there were demonstrations against the far-right. So maybe that's the way we've got to go. On the other hand, Hungary, pretty bad, Slovakia, pretty bad, Italy, and all these countries. So I just think it's a battle for public opinion. And we've got to use every means possible. The other thing I would quite like, and I've been suggesting it, is this. I thought Guy Lineker made quite an important impact, not just on Fulham football ground, but generally when he speaks up on behalf of refugees. Well, I would like to see if we can find a number of celebrities, not from the obvious world where world of politics where they would be saying these things, but from different contexts, and get them all together and see if they can actually speak out collectively on behalf of refugees. You know, from worlds that we don't expect. The world of football is an obvious one. From worlds where you don't normally expect a commitment to refugees. And I wonder whether we can do things like that. But we've all got to work at it. And it can be done nationally and locally. It's a long answer, but it is a very difficult problem for all European countries. And it hasn't quite got as poisonous as it here has elsewhere, but it's getting that way if we're not careful.
Al, thank you. I can see a gentleman here.
Thanks. Nick Bowes, long-standing Tooting Labour Party member, but now in exile in Lewisham, so apologies. Really great words from you tonight, Alf. But just on the European Convention on Human Rights, you mentioned that a little bit. There's a growing sense that the right are coming for that as the next Brexit. How do we on the left make a case for membership? How do we build a coalition and how do we build alliances to defend it, both because of the benefits it brings to us and other countries in Europe? Because it's quite hard for politicians, I think, to defend the convention because it's easy to attack it. So what's your thoughts on how we do that?
Well, but it's being but it's being used quite cynically by some government ministers and so on, because it has stopped arbitrary removals of people or decisions that contravene human rights. So in a way, well, what I would say is this. I would say, first of all, we helped to found it. I think Churchill was the founder. We helped to found the European Convention on Human Rights. We've been the best adherents of it, and it protects all of us. It isn't just something for them. It protects everybody. We have it, and I think adherence to international conventions is important. As a country, we've traditionally always done that, and to depart from it is awful. And you know, if it's going to be used about Rwanda, you know, and if the government decides that they don't believe in the rule of law, they're willing to override the Supreme Court, they're willing to override the European Convention, then as a country we have gone down and down in terms of the standards we practice. So I just think it's fundamental to us that we are internationalists in the sense we accept international human rights conventions, that these matter to us, they've been fundamental to the sort of country we are, and we want to cooperate with other countries that agree with that. You know, I think that's the best I can do. Maybe somebody's got a better way of arguing it, but I would say it's absolutely there. And the abusers of human rights will take every advantage. If we don't stick to the convention, they will do it. They will break the convention, and then it's just going to get worse and worse. So I think we've just got to say loudly and clearly, this is something fundamental to the sort of country we are. It's what we believe in, and we're going to go on supporting it.
But Alf, in a way, I think you said it in your lecture, and you said it again, that really we need to follow your example, because what we need to do is to tell the stories. And that's what helps people to understand why these things are important, because of the personal impact it has. And those stories that you told of going to those camps, what you saw, and the way that you talk about that in the House of Lords, on television and everything else, it has a major impact. So I think it's something that we all need to learn, or take a lesson from you on.
Well, I don't know about a lesson from me, but I think it's the way we should all do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Here.
Hello, it's Leslie Mercer from Keighley and Ilkley Labour Party in West Yorkshire. Without being at all complacent, we will hopefully have a new government in the not too distant future. You're much closer than we are in West Yorkshire. How confident are you that with a new government we will see real improvement?
And you're going to hold me to that. Okay, well, here's what I believe. I believe, and I know Yvette Cooper, and I've listened to her, and I've just discussed with her, I have a lot of faith in Yvette Cooper and what she believes in, which is, I think, very similar to the things that we believe in. It won't be perfect. There will be difficulties for a government. So what I say is, a next Labour government will be better, but probably some of us will feel not good enough and will say so. And that's the right and proper political process. You know, the things I would like to happen are probably going to be more difficult for a government, certainly in its first year or two. But I have faith that things will get better, and some of the things that the senior Labour Party people have been saying have been pretty good. Better cooperation with Europe, better agreements, and more determined effort to catch the people traffickers, but consistent with human rights principles. This is not bad, but you know, I may sound naive. I think we will be gratified at what the next government will do, but it probably won't go as far as I would like it to. Okay? And that's, being dissatisfied is a good thing. It propels the government to do more.
Thank you, Alf.
My name is Prasanta. You mentioned that you had a very good reception at schools, which is very encouraging because it's young people, obviously. Does that present hope for the future?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, I think it does. I think young people absorb discussion about refugees. They listen and they seem to understand what's going on better than I think perhaps other people do. So, in other words, in the common parlance, they really do get it. And I think they respond with good questions and with a wish to talk and discuss. So I think there is a hope for the future, but we've got to spread the word. You know, we've got to make sure that some schools are very good at this and some schools are not. I was at a school in their home counties, a place where people commute, heavy commuter traffic, and there was no little cafe at the station. So the kids from the school decided for a week during Refugee Week to provide free coffee and croissant to anybody who was commuting to London. Free. And they had a collecting box, and they made a lot of money for refugees. So it showed a good level of commitment. It was a nice way of raising money. I think one has to have faith in young people, both the ones when they get a little bit older, when they work as volunteers, the ones that work for our NGOs, who I think do a terrific job, and the younger ones who listen and absorb it, and then I hope go and tell their parents what they've learned.
Thank you. Okay, everybody's putting their hands up now. So I've got here, then there, then there.
Thank you, Alf, for your talk tonight. And I wanted to ask you a question, I suppose, coming a little bit down the other end of the telescope. I spent most of the last, 5 years. So my name's Jane Ellison. I was former MP for Battersea. So I spent much of the last 6 years working for the United Nations. It was a huge privilege, and working particularly with people from all over the world. And it struck me that even people whose countries were very troubled in some way were enormously proud of their country and wanted to see it succeed. You articulated some of the reasons that drive, migration and drive people out of their countries. Do you not think those of us who want to see a decent discussion, as you say, with decent language to find ways through on these difficult issues, need to start addressing some of the solutions to the core problems, whether it's conflict, whether it's climate change? They're much more complicated than the easy, far-right arguments. But we should at least, do you think, perhaps begin to articulate that, as you said, internationally, with other countries, but begin to actually talk about how we can make it easy for people to be successful in their own country, which most of them would like to live in and succeed in.
Alf has asked me to take 2 questions at a time now, so we can fit everyone in. So we'll take this other question.
Evening, Alf. Mia Morris, community activist and what else. But just to say, have you seen the film One Day? And I think it'd be really good if everyone goes to see it and arranges events and activities for it to be a discussion point. And what would make your perfect day?
I'm not sure what the last bit of it, but working backwards. Yeah, I heard somebody suggest that the film one day should be shown in all schools, to answer the earlier question, because it actually makes people think and realise just what has happened in the past and why it is important that we should be sensitive to human rights abuses, sensitive to the sort of things that happened in Europe in the 1930s, and why it is important that we should learn the lessons from then to today. So all this matters. So the answer is yes. Did you say what would make my perfect day? Oh. Oh, I think being with good friends and having a good political discussion and agreeing the way forward in a difficult situation, that helps to make it a good day. Right. Jane, look, I think we've got to both... I think if I understood you, two things. One is, I think the more of a balanced, sensible discussion we have about refugees, the better. The discussion tends to be more heat and less light, and the more we can have a sensible discussion as to what the causes are, what we can do, what are the options, why we're constrained. We can't do everything, what the difficulties are. I think that can only be helpful by way of making people understand and make them more sympathetic. And then, of course, yes, the countries of origin. If we can do something and help the countries of origin so that they don't generate refugee flows, of course. But the way the world is, and some of the things people are escaping from, whether it's the Syrian conflict, whether it's the Taliban, after all, people say to me, why is so many of the Afghans coming young men? The reason is that even before the Taliban took over in Afghanistan, the Taliban wanted to recruit young men or boys into their fighting forces. And to escape having to do that, the families clubbed together and helped them to get out. So that's how some of these Afghans came, and they ended up in Calais or wherever it is. But of course, most of them have gone elsewhere. But dealing with the root causes is particularly difficult. Because look, what do we do about this Ethiopia, Sudan and so on? You will know from your United Nations work just how difficult these things are. But we've got to try, and we've got to try. And we've got to set the right standard. As well, and be sympathetic to countries like Bangladesh. So they've had 1 million people in that southern strip of near Cox's Bazar. A very difficult situation for them, and I think we've got to be alert to that and realise this is really difficult. So the answer is yes, but let's go on having good discussions.
Thank you. I'm going to take the final two questions, John, and then the gentleman behind. Yeah.
Thank you, Baroness Alos. John Birkin. If I just... Oh, I think
you brought me to order. Alf, in thanking you profusely for all you've done for the cause of decency, compassion and humanity in public service, might I, on an optimistic note, put it to you that the government's position on the Safety of Rwanda bill is not only deeply obnoxious, but ultimately destined to fail. And the reason why it will fail is that the government itself has completely run out of road, and people can see this for what it is, a thoroughly cynical device. There are many press release bills over the generations, but this really does take the biscuit. You can't legislate to redefine reality, and people know it, and the government is going to get smacked in the face for this, richly, deservedly.
I'm not sure there was a question there, but... We'll take our final question.
My name is Mark Hodgkinson. I'm not a member of the Labour Party or any party. Do I dare to inquire of Alf Dubs whether he is prepared to admit to any extent that the terms of the original Treaty on Human Rights, the ways in which it set out to deal with immediately post-war immigration, is unfit to cope with the scenario in which we now find ourselves internationally?
Okay. Right.
Thank you.
Okay. First of all, on the Rwanda bill, yes, John, yes, I agree. But indeed, you know, you won't be surprised that certainly in the Lords, quite a few Conservatives are actually also deeply unhappy about what the government are doing. And they say so in the division lobbies, and they say quite openly. People who've been Conservatives all their lives say openly that they're not happy about this at all. So yes, I agree with you, and more people agree with you than perhaps the government realises. Okay. Now on the second question, quite often I have it put to me more in relation to the 1951 Geneva Convention than in relation to the European Convention on Human Rights as to whether they are valid today. I would say that the European Convention on Human Rights, I think, probably still has stood the test of time. Now, the Geneva Convention, which I fully support, is a bit more difficult. But there are people who want to change it. And I would resist that. And the reason is that people want to change it, want to make it less humane, less humanitarian. If we could agree that we would make it more humane, more humanitarian, we might be able to change it a bit. But I don't like to get into that discussion because I'm fearful that it will be used for the opposite ends which we would wish to achieve. So the answer is, I think both of those, and the Convention on Torture and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, I think they're pretty good at the moment. And although they may have flaws, I think that they serve us better than if we try to change them at this point in time. But I understand why you're asking the question. But I just think a lot of good people have argued the Geneva Convention should be revised. I tend to argue against that, simply because I suspect that the argument about it will leave us worse off than we are now in terms of human rights.
Can I thank you all very much indeed for your questions, and Alf, a huge thank you for those very comprehensive replies. I know that you want to say something else. You want to do it now?
Whenever. You're the boss.
Okay, why don't you do it now?
Okay. Can I just say, I want to say thank you both for the questions and also for the people who organised this. I was unhappy about it being called after my name, and I still am, but you know, I had to live with that because I couldn't change their minds. But I do think that the committee have put an awful lot of effort into this. I know they worked incredibly hard. Fiona, you've been incredibly supportive, and I just think it's only right that I should acknowledge just what a tremendous effort it has gone into this evening, and how I hope it has been helpful for all of us. And I look forward to future lectures next year and the year after.
It really has been incredible. Now, for those of you, these lights are very bright. For those of you who don't know me, I am Marsha de Cordova, and I am the proud Member of Parliament for Battersea. And can I say it's wonderful to see so many of you here, many friends of Battersea Labour, many from the causes that Alf also supported. But I think what's really quite awesome is I believe it's the first that we have all the former Battersea MPs here, which is a first. And I'm really pleased to have my dear friend Martin Linton here this evening as well, who's been showing me such great support. But today's inaugural lecture comes really quite timely ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day at the weekend, but also, as we've heard, the film One Life, which is currently on release, which really tells the story of the kinder transport and the brilliant work that Sir Nicholas and Winton did, that Alf was also part of. I really think it's quite something. But you know, his actions really demonstrate what many of us believe, the values that we hold and our commitment to real good common humanity, but also our shared compassion for others. And I think that might be lost on some in our society today. But Alf, I want to say, you know, you said it with such humility and modesty and with lots of humour, actually, I have to say. But you are an extraordinary public servant, both as a legislator, even during your time as a minister in Northern Ireland, but as a campaigner for human rights issues. And you spoke quite thoroughly on your work around, you know, the work with refugees, but also your Dubs Amendment. And when I came into the House and we had the opportunity to vote in 2020 on that. It was a proud moment, but also, as you alluded to, the government obviously kept changing and what they wanted to do in that space. But Battersea, as many of you know, has such a proud history, not just a proud history for being radical, for being progressive, but a proud history of welcoming refugees. And we have seen that with so many residents showing their kindness and their openness in welcoming so many Ukrainian refugees. And that's why I think it's so important that we remain quite steadfast in our opposition to immigration policies that are divisive. Things like the illegal migration bill and now the Rwanda bill, which really, as we all know, does not align with any of our policies. And it really is going to be down to our wonderful colleagues in the Lords to do their work in that space to ensure that we can somehow try and kill off that awful bill, because it doesn't align with our values, and it certainly does not align with any of the UN conventions that we are signatories to. We need to ensure, Alfie said this, that there are safe and legal routes. That's what we all want to see happening. And I believe together, as you said, Alf, we need to keep telling those stories. And if we do that, then maybe we can begin to change some of those mindsets. But as you alluded to, obviously, nobody could have predicted that we'd have a war in the Ukraine and the awful, devastating situation in Gaza. Alfie spoke about that. And I know it's heartbreaking for so many of us to see what's happening to both Palestinians and Israelis. And Alf, you and I both are strong believers in wanting a ceasefire and to see a solution of peace coming forward, because 25,000 lives lost, 10,000 of which are children, it really does resonate with so many of us when we think this cannot go on. And this has all taken place in the space of just 110 days. We need a ceasefire, and that has to happen. We also need to redouble our efforts and our commitments to upholding human rights and protecting the rights of the most marginalised in our society. And the best way I think we can honour Alf's legacy and his outstanding work that he has done over his long and his distinguished career is about creating a more fair and equal and just society for everybody, because as has already been said many, many times, we all have so much more in common, of which that may divide us. And just finally, I want to say a note of thanks, and I know there will be some more thanks coming after me, but can I say a huge thank you to the organisers of this inaugural lecture. I'm looking forward to future lectures, and to Anne and also to Fiona for all your generosity in making this happen. This truly has been a magnificent evening. I also want to mention Tarek and the brilliant team at the Battersea Arts Centre, who this year are celebrating their 50th birthday, which, you know, there are some exciting things to come. And for me, as also a trustee of the BAC, I'm really quite proud to have such a radical institution based here. But I just want to touch on a very brief history about this building. As Alf alluded to, he was elected in 1979. I was only just born, frankly. But nonetheless, a number of decades before that, in the Grand Hall downstairs, you know, Battersea elected its London's first black mayor in John Archer. There's a proud history here. It must be. So proud of. So thank you all very much for being here. And just one final plug, I've said that already, haven't I? But one more final plug for anybody that would want to consider supporting future lectures. Anne will be in the bar, so please do, as she says, form an orderly queue. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, good evening, everybody. I think my lines have been stolen both by Alf and by Marshall, so that's made my job especially easy this evening. Being chair of a constituency party, or indeed a constituency association, is an interesting task. You have good days, maybe some not so good. But one thing you can absolutely be sure about is that organising this event has been the most joyous and the most fulfilling event that I think all of us have been involved in putting together. Now, thank you so much for giving your talk this evening and making this whole event possible. Everybody who's been involved has worked incredibly hard to put this together. All of the committee, and Fiona, Judy, all been mentioned, but one person in particular, the roving Mike, who is our absolute support, JP Charrington, who has worked harder than anybody in putting this together. He's the one person who has a day job. All of the rest of us can sit back and relax. But JP does this over and above, and we want to give some special thanks to him for everything he's done. But there is no such thing as a free inaugural Alf Dubs lecture. And so, on behalf of Safe Passage, I'd just like to say a few words. Safe Passage International, as many of you will know, but just for the record, helps child refugees to reunite with their families without feeling forced to risk their lives further on dangerous journeys. Many of these children have already fled from traumatic situations, often travelling alone or spending time in unstable shelters on their journey to reach safety and family. Safe Passage works with children and their families by providing free legal advice and essential family reunion casework to ensure that families can be together again in a place where they can start to rebuild their lives. Alongside this essential casework provision, they also run award-winning crisis response programs, currently for Ukraine and Afghanistan, and they also run influential campaigns across the country, many of which involve the award-winning Safe Passage Young Leaders, a group of young refugees in the UK. With refugee rights continually under attack at the moment, we join Alf in calling for your support for Safe Passage and your solidarity with refugees today, to help them give more families who have been torn apart by war, persecution or human rights abuses the chance to be together again in safety. Thank you for listening to that, an explanation of Safe Passage's work, and I hope that seeing the importance of supporting its continuation, you will be generous this evening. Please consider supporting the cause. There's a retiring collection, as you know, as we leave the council chamber. Cash and electronic means are available, and of course you can also click on the QR code on your programme, and that will take you straight to the donation page of Safe Passage. I hope you enjoyed the evening. Inaugural was the word, but I hope it won't be the last, because I think everybody's had a great time. And Alf, Valerie, thank you so much for doing all of this, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.